The desert was not empty. It only looked that way to those who moved too fast. Up close, it breathed, slow, heavy, alive. The sand shifted in small size, the wind tracing invisible paths across the dunes. Every grain carried a history it did not choose. By noon, the heat had erased the horizon. The air trembled in waves, bending light until even the stones looked like they were melting. A single snake moved through it all, gliding low, its body writing soft lines into the dust that vanished as soon as they were made. It moved without sound, its scales pressed against the earth like memory on a wound, delicate, deliberate, unavoidable. There were no trees, no birds, no clouds, only the land and what crawled across it. The snake followed an old path, one it did not remember, but its body did. Each twist of its spine matched the shape of the ground as if rehearsed. It stopped only once, near a half-buried shape, a piece of metal, dull with rust. A buckle, maybe, or the edge of a blade. It flicked its tongue toward it, tasted the air. The scent was faint, but familiar. Iron, heat, and something else. Something like the echo of pain. The wind rose, pushing the sand aside for a moment. Beneath the buckle was bone, thin, dry, the color of dust. The snake moved closer, resting its head against the edge of the bone, not in hunger, but in stillness. Its body coiled loosely around the small hollow the wind had carved, circling what had once been a hand. The desert shifted again, covering half the skeleton, uncovering something else. The imprint of a boot sole, hardened in place by years of heat. For a long while, the snake didn't move. Its tongue tasted the ground, slow and patient. There was no life here, but there was memory, the kind that stayed long after meaning had gone. Far to the west, a shape appeared on the horizon. A man walking. The air blurred him, turning each step into a ripple. He carried nothing but a canteen and a stick. His clothes were the same color as the earth. He didn't see the snake until he was almost on top of it. He stopped. The snake lifted its head, the sunlight flashing briefly across its scales. The man froze, not in fear, but in recognition. He had seen its kind before. For a few seconds, neither moved. The heat between them shimmered like glass. Then, the snake slid aside, smooth as falling water, disappearing behind a rock. The man exhaled, long and quiet, and crouched. He brushed the sand away from the half-buried bones. His hands were cracked, skin split from salt and dust. He stared at what the desert had left behind. A shape almost human, almost forgotten. "It's been a long time," he whispered. The wind didn't answer. It never did. He stayed there, kneeling, until the shadow of the rock swallowed him whole. The heat softened, the air cooled. When he finally stood, he took a step back and looked toward the snake's trail. It was faint now, already disappearing under drifting sand. But he could still see the pattern of its movement. Slow, unbroken, unafraid. He followed it for a while, not knowing why. Maybe because it was the only thing still moving in a place that had forgotten how. By dusk, the wind had risen again. The desert darkened to copper, then to bruised violet. The man stopped and looked back. His footprints had vanished. Only the snake's line remained, cutting through the sand in a smooth curve that led nowhere. He smiled without joy. "You remember better than we do," he said softly. The stars came, faint and trembling. The desert breathed again, shallow, slow, eternal. Somewhere beneath the quiet crawl of a single creature, the dust shifted. A faint tremor, almost soundless. It wasn't the movement of life, but the twitch of memory. The earth was remembering. Not the man, not the bones, but the moment when blood had touched its surface. The warmth, the brief wait, the truth of being alive. And under the snake's quiet crawl, the dust recalled that taste and waited for it to return. The night took the heat away, but not the weight. The desert never truly cooled. It only changed its shape. What had burned by day now breathed in slow drafts of dry air, carrying the scent of dust and stone and something older, the quiet left behind by men who had forgotten how to listen. The man walked until the stars blurred. His steps were steady, neither hurried nor hesitant, as if he feared stopping more than he feared the dark. The sound of his boots was soft, half swallowed by sand. He carried no light. There was nothing here to illuminate but emptiness. Once, long ago, this road had been marked. The desert had swallowed its stones, its signs, and the voices that once echoed along it. Only the wind remembered the direction. The man followed that. When the first hint of dawn touched the horizon, a thin silver line between black and red, he saw movement again. Not the snake this time. Something else. At first it looked like the shimmer of heat, but it held shape. He blinked, wiped the grit from his eyes, and saw them. Poles, thin and crooked, jutting from the ground, half buried. He approached. They were wooden ones, blackened now, leaning like ribs breaking through the sand. At their base, pieces of fabric clung to the grain, faded stiff with age. Flags. He crouched, brushing the sand aside. Underneath he found iron, broken rings, bolts, something that might once have been the frame of a cart or the corner of a weapon. He pressed his hand to it. It was warm, as though the desert still remembered the moment it had fallen. He straightened slowly, scanning the horizon. The dunes shifted subtly in the growing light, the shadows deepening in their troughs. Between them he could see faint shapes, mounds that weren't natural, edges too straight, too human. He walked toward them. The first was small, the curve of a helmet, half-eaten by rust. Then another, the outline of a wheel, the shattered rim of a crate. A little farther on, the sand dropped away suddenly, revealing a shallow depression lined with stone. He stopped at its edge. At the bottom lay bones. Hundreds of them. Some clean, some half-buried, some bound together by the memory of fabric and leather straps. It wasn't a grave. It was where things had been left. Not buried, just forgotten. The man descended carefully, his boots sliding in the loose grit. When he reached the center, he knelt, picked up a fragment of metal. It was part of a canteen, dented and split. He turned it over in his hand and saw the faint trace of letters, worn smooth by time. The dust around him stirred. The wind moved across the hollow, carrying a sound that could almost have been breath. He froze, listening. Nothing. Then, a hiss. Soft, low, near his ear. He turned his head and saw it. The snake. The same one or one just like it. Its body was half coiled around a broken ribcage, its eyes dull in the gray light. It didn't strike. It simply watched him, motionless. The man exhaled slowly. "You again," he murmured. "Or maybe you never left." He reached out his hand toward the sand between them, palm open. The snake didn't move. Its tongue flicked once, tasting the air. Then it lowered its head, pressing it against the earth as if in acknowledgement. The man followed its gaze. Beneath the snake's coil, the sand had shifted, just enough to reveal a darker layer beneath. A stain, small but visible, even after all this time. He touched it with his fingertips. The soil there was different, denser, like the ground had hardened from memory alone. He rubbed it between his fingers, brought it to his nose. It smelled faintly of iron. He sat back, silent. Around him, the wind moved again, stronger this time, tugging at his clothes, whistling through the hollow bones. The poles above creaked softly, their old cloth whispering like voices from far away. He closed his eyes. In the sound of the wind, he could almost hear the echoes of men shouting, brief, broken, swallowed before they finished. The crack of something metallic, the short silence that always follows violence. When he opened his eyes again, the snake was gone. Its trail ran straight out of the hollow, cutting through the sand toward the east. He stood, brushing the dust from his palms. "You remember, don't you?" he said quietly to the empty air. "All of it." The wind died suddenly, leaving the world still again. He looked down once more at the mark in the soil, that faint, ancient trace of red that the desert had refused to erase, and then toward the horizon. The sun was rising now, pale and unforgiving. It flattened the shadows, made the bones look clean. The man turned his back to it and began to walk where the snake had gone. Each step sank into the sand and disappeared. He left no shadow behind him. The light was too even, too merciless. It swallowed his shape whole. But for a little while, in the hollow he had left, the dust shifted again. The faint outline of his boot print lingered, not deep enough to last, but just long enough for the desert to taste it. The ground was remembering once more, and as the man walked east, the horizon shimmered red. By the third day, the desert had begun to blur itself. The air shimmered constantly now, like heat was trying to erase the horizon and everything that walked beneath it. The man moved through it slowly, each step a conversation with exhaustion. The canteen at his belt was nearly empty. His lips were cracked, his eyes the color of dust. He followed the faint trail where the snake had gone, though by now it was only memory, a soft ripple in the sand that came and went with the wind. Still, he kept walking, not out of faith, not even out of hope, but because stopping would mean remembering, and the desert did that too well on its own. By noon, the sun was white and blinding. The ground was too hot to kneel on, so he walked bent forward, keeping his gaze low. Once, when he stumbled, he fell to his knees and caught himself with both hands. The sand hissed against his palms, alive, whispering. It wasn't language, not exactly, but it sounded like something human once, when the wind shifted just right, a faint murmuring rising and falling like breath. He sat there for a long time, head bowed, until the heat steadied and the noise quieted. Then he whispered hoarse, "You remember them too, don't you?" The desert didn't answer. It never did. It only breathed. He took a sip from the canteen, the last one, and set it aside. The metal was too hot to touch. He untied the cloth from around his neck and wiped the sweat from his eyes. And then he saw it. Far ahead, half buried in the dunes, stood a structure. Not a building, just the remains of one. A low wall, maybe 2 meters high, the edges broken and leaning inward. Around it, fragments of something once human-made. A carved stone, a rusted hinge, the corner of a step leading nowhere. He walked toward it. When he reached the wall, he realized it had been part of a larger shape. A circle, maybe a courtyard. Inside, the ground was different. The sand was finer, almost white, and in its center lay a flat stone slab, cracked but intact. He brushed it clean with his sleeve. Beneath the dust, faint lines emerged, markings, worn, almost invisible. Not letters, not symbols he could name, just grooves cut by careful hands long ago. He traced one with his finger. The stone was cool, impossibly so, as though it had never known the sun. And then he heard it again, that soft sound like whispering. He turned his head sharply. The wind had shifted again, moving through the broken stones. It made the same low murmur as before, but now he could hear rhythm in it. Pauses, breaths, the shape of something that might once have been speech. He closed his eyes and listened. For a moment, the desert was full of voices. Not clear ones, but murmured prayers, hundreds of them, rising and falling like waves. Words too old to understand, too honest to forget. The air grew heavy. The wind stopped. When he opened his eyes again, the world was still. Only the heat shimmered, alive and uncertain. At the edge of the circle, movement caught his eye. The snake was there, half hidden in shadow, coiled near the base of the wall. Its body was marked with dust, dull but intact. It stared at him without fear. He didn't move closer. He only said quietly, "You brought me here." The snake flicked its tongue, tasting the air. Then it slid forward, crossing the circle toward the slab. Its body brushed against the grooves in the stone, tracing them the way the man's fingers had moments before. The markings caught the light, just briefly, but enough. In the reflection of the heat, they looked red. The man felt his stomach tighten. He crouched again, staring at the stone, at the lines that now looked like veins. "It's not a shrine," he said softly. "It's a grave." He reached out, pressing his palm flat against the center. The air above it trembled. The whispering returned, quieter now, closer, as if the sound were moving not around him but through him. He knelt fully, head bowed, his hand still on the stone. He didn't pray. He didn't know how anymore. But something in him, something small, dry, unguarded, opened just enough for the silence to enter. The whispering faded. The snake had stopped moving. It lay beside him, still as the slab. For a long time, neither creature nor man made a sound. The heat passed over them like a slow tide, burning, cleansing, erasing. When the first shadow appeared across the dunes, a circling hawk, perhaps, or the memory of one, the man finally stood. His knees trembled, his skin gray with dust. He looked down at the stone once more. The markings no longer shone. The wind had covered them again. Only the faint outline of the snake's trail remained across it, a single curved line, dark against pale sand. He whispered, "All things leave a trace." Then he turned east, following where the dunes bent toward the horizon. The snake lingered a moment longer, head raised, tongue tasting the air. And then, silently, it followed. As they moved away, the wind returned, filling the circle with the soft hiss of sand. It erased their prints first, then the stone, then even the shadow of the wall. But beneath it all, under the thin layer of new dust, the grooves still glowed faintly red, as if the desert itself was remembering the sound of prayers. By dawn, the dunes had changed again. What was a path yesterday was gone now, replaced by new ridges of sand, small valleys of silence. The desert never forgot, but it never remembered in the same shape twice. The man walked anyway. The snake followed, a line of movement barely visible against the trembling skin of the earth. The sun rose hard and fast, a white coin burning through haze. It made no warmth, only weight. The man's clothes were stiff with salt, his skin cracked in the creases of his hands. He had not eaten in 2 days. He did not feel hunger anymore, only thirst, and not for water, but for something alive. By midday, the sky turned colorless. Even the shadows disappeared. The man stopped to rest beside a fallen rock half buried in sand. The snake coiled nearby, body still, tongue flicking occasionally. Its scales shimmered faintly, bronze, gray, dust. The man watched it for a long time, his breathing shallow. "You remember everything, don't you?" he whispered. His voice was raw, more air than sound. "Every drop that ever touched this ground." The snake didn't move. Its eyes caught the light, 2 small mirrors. The man saw himself reflected there, distorted, fading. He laughed once, dry and quiet. "Then you remember us." What we did. The wind rose slowly, building from a sigh into a hum. It moved through the dunes in long, curling lines, carrying with it the faintest hint of metal and ash. The man turned his face into it. The air was sharp, tasting of something old, blood perhaps, or rust too deep to name. He looked east. The horizon was trembling, blurred. Something dark moved there, not storm, not dust, something heavier. He shaded his eyes. The shape was long, uneven, crawling. It took him a moment to understand what he was seeing. Tanks, or what was left of them. Half-buried hulks, corroded, eaten by the wind. Their gun barrels pointed upward like dead branches. Around them, the ground had hardened into strange, circular patterns. Blast marks fossilized by time. The sand here was different, darker. He walked toward them, step by slow step. The snake followed in silence. When he reached the first wreck, he placed a hand on its side. The metal burned his palm. The desert had polished it smooth, the color of old bone. Through a crack in the armor, he saw the faint shape of something inside. A human skull, turned toward the sky. He didn't flinch. He only said, "So this is where the earth learned." The wind hissed through the hollow barrel, low and hollow, almost a voice. The sound grew, deepened, became something close to music. The soft, endless hum of air passing through old iron. The man closed his eyes. For a moment he could hear them. The shouts, the thunder, the breaking. The kind of sound that carves itself into the ground. The kind that doesn't fade, only changes pitch. He opened his eyes again. The snake had crawled onto the tank's surface, its body moving across the rust like handwriting. It stopped by the barrel, lifted its head, and hissed softly. The sound joined the wind's hum perfectly, as if the two were remembering the same song. The man said nothing. He only listened. The sun shifted again. The light struck the sand just right, revealing faint marks between the tanks. Small depressions, almost footprints. The shape of men running, falling, rising again. The wind had never erased them completely. It had kept them like scars. He knelt beside one. The shape was shallow, but his fingers fit into it exactly. "It's all still here," he whispered. "Everything we tried to forget." The snake slid down from the wreck, weaving around his arm. It was neither threat nor comfort. Its body was cool, its scales dry and smooth. He didn't move. He just watched as it coiled once around his wrist, then rested there, still as the heat. The wind grew stronger. Sand lifted in slow sheets, drifting around him, covering the old metal, filling the empty prints. He closed his eyes against it. When it passed, the world was different again. The tanks were half gone now, the marks erased, the ground smooth and perfect, as if nothing had ever happened here. The snake uncoiled, slipped away into the dunes. The man stood and followed, though his steps were slower, uneven. His body felt heavy, his mind light. He climbed a small rise and stopped at the top. From there, the desert stretched forever, golden, clean, quiet. Not a trace of what he had seen remained. No bones, no iron, no sound. Only the wind, still humming softly to itself. The man sank to his knees. His voice came out as a whisper, almost a confession. "You covered it well," he said. "But you didn't forget." The wind touched his face, gentle, almost kind. The snake was a faint line now, disappearing into the horizon. He smiled faintly. The corners of his mouth cracked with salt. He leaned forward, pressing his hand to the sand. "I won't either." The desert didn't answer. It only shifted, small grains flowing between his fingers, moving to fill the hollow his touch had made. By sunset, the wind rose once more. It circled him, slow, deliberate, carrying dust that glittered faintly red in the fading light. The man's prints vanished first, then the line of the snake, then even the sound. And when night came, the wind lay still. The same wind that had buried everything it loved, humming quietly under the stars, remembering every drop of blood it had ever learned to taste.